Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Adam White. Can't we all have someone defending us the way Jason Denayer and Leo Dubois do last night? All on how they were absolutely heroic as the Avengers you may see later this summer, and all look into Ligue, games that we also had as well in this midweek after your latest headlines. Lyon held Barcelona to a 0-0 draw at the Groupama Stadium on Tuesday night in the first leg of the round of 16 Champions League tie. Ligue conceded 15 shots, but no away goals as they head to the Camp Nou in a few weeks' time with nothing to lose and everything to gain. On Wednesday night, Paris Saint-Germain managed to squeeze in one of their games in hand thanks to a special dispensation from UEFA as they beat Montpellier 5-1. The rampant scoreline is somewhat unfair on the away side, who did level on 35 minutes, and a number of the goals in the second half were either big deflections or own goals. In much less entertaining affair, Guingamp held Bordeaux at the Matmut Atlantique to a goalless draw, with Nolan Roux missing the huge chance for the bottom side to claim all 3 points. This evening in the Europa League, Rennes are through to the next round after winning 3-1 at Betis. Ryan Bensebaini and Hatem Ben Arfa put the away side ahead, but Giovanni Lo Celso's goal made it a little bit nervy for the rest of the game, but a counter-attack in the last minute saw by Niang seal the victory and their keys to the next round. And that's all for now, but for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening with the Champions League game that we saw on Tuesday night. And while some will be praising Lyon's, the lack of, well, instead of praising Lyon's ability to defend, have sort of bemoaned Barcelona's lack of scoring ability in this one. But Adam, from a French perspective and from a Lyon perspective, that's maybe doing a little bit of disservice. I'm assuming a lot of people might be watching the other game that was on Tuesday night. But in all honesty, watching the entire game, it never felt like Barcelona really had the greatest chance to score. I mean, a lot of the goals were from distance and shots that Lopez could deal with. It never really looked like that Barcelona were going to score.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Barcelona obviously had a lot of pressure, and occasionally, there was a sort of a number of occasions, especially in the first half, which to be honest, the game was kind of pretty open for long periods, but there were sort of periods in the first half where they sort of managed to win the ball back pretty high up, or there was the possession was given away, and there was a bit of space, and there was sort of on the turn they looked quite dangerous counter-attacking Barcelona. But you're right, they never really fashioned a gilt-edged chance, as it were, to that you would say, like when Lyon beat Manchester City or drew Manchester City at home, they missed those two massive chances in the first half, and there was nothing akin to that. So I think, Lyon held Barcelona sort of just about at arm's length, even though they were under a lot of pressure, as you said. Dubois and Denayer were brilliant, and I thought they defended really, really well. I think this is pretty much, obviously winning would be better, but this is a good result for Lyon. They've proven that they can go away to superior opposition when that team, Manchester City, for example, is expected to win, and they know how to win those games. Ginesio has proven that he knows how to win that sort of game. Obviously, Barcelona, given the fact that they've outright stated that they are focusing on the Champions League this year after what happened with Roma last year, despite winning the double, Ernesto Valverde's double that they achieved, and Lionel Messi was fantastic last season. That double hasn't been seen in particularly good light, even though they won a double, which is still pretty amazing, because of that Roma debacle. And they've said that it's their priority this season, which perhaps any other year, there would be a chance that Lyon could hope for some Barcelona complacency. I don't think that'll happen, but there is the opportunity for them to get a 1-1 draw. Perhaps I can see them scoring at the Nou Camp for sure. I would imagine a similarly open game, although that kind of died down in the second half in the week. The last half an hour was pretty much all Barcelona, but there's going to be opportunities for Lyon, and I'll be happy with the performance and happy with the result.
And they had a couple of sly little moments. I know I saw that Marcelo mentioned after the game that he had a trickier time facing Mbappe than Messi on the evening, and he maybe was a little bit quiet, and Suarez had a couple of frustrating moments. But I think everyone's mentioned at the end that the defence was terrific. I thought Jason Denayer especially was exceptional. I thought that he marshalled Suarez well. He was the sort of last man defence at times, just when it looked like Barcelona might slide through. It was him that would be in the way. Dubois was excellent. He had that really well-timed challenge in the second half when it looked like, I can't quite remember who they almost put through. It might have even been Suarez himself, just in front of Lopez. The goalkeeper had an excellent game, had a couple of important saves he needed to make. Maybe we're a little bit disappointed that the attack wasn't a little bit more forthright when they had their moments. I thought Depay was pretty poor. I thought that Dembele didn't really get himself into the game. Bertrand Traore was sort of on the periphery as well. None of those three really excelled. It was one of those games that was maybe crying out for a Fekir. If we had someone like his genius, it might have even been an even more special result. But yeah, the defence was terrific. I think the fact that, like we're mentioning, people are going, Barcelona had 15 shots, but only 5 of those were on target. And in all honesty, like I mentioned before, that there were a lot of them were sort of from distance. Sergio Busquets had at least 2 on target that were pretty straightforward, even though they're from sort of 25 yards away. So if he's having the shots on target, that you're doing something right. They were almost doing what other teams have done to them this season, which is keeping them outside of the box, and it sort of nullified their threat completely. And that, like you say, leads to the game at the Camp Nou in a few weeks' time. I think it's about 3 weeks when they play again. We get a week off from Europe next week, but they've sort of, at the moment, really, there's no pressure on them to get anything at the Camp Nou. I mean, all the pressure is on Barcelona now. They need to get a result, and if you may be getting Fekir back in this one as well, a little bit of extra creativity and drive. It's not completely out of the ordinary to say that Lyon should really fancy their chances to maybe nick one, and if they perform like that again, to progress.
No, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. You know, I think you're right. There was sort of had little moments, Lyon, yesterday where the game was a little bit out of balance, and they, like I mentioned, Barcelona did sort of won the ball back or managed to play the right pass. And there are a few sort of half opportunities on the counter where perhaps a more on form Memphis Depay or a Nabil Fekir playing in the same position would have picked a better pass or been able to you sort of turn away from his marker a little bit quicker. And there were players in space, and you felt like there was just a half chance that with the right ball they were in a similar way to Barcelona were on a number of occasions. But those chances sort of produced themselves for Lyon as well. And I would imagine, with the space that tends to open up at the new camp, with Barcelona pushing forward, it's a very, very big pitch. It will be bigger. It's margins. It's quite small margins from pitch to pitch, but it feels like there's a lot of space in new camp when in those situations when there's a turnover and you can counter. I would back Lyon to score, absolutely. Just whether they can keep Barcelona out sufficiently is open to debate. But I agree. I think there's opportunities for them at the new camp for sure.
Yeah, I think they can definitely go in there with no fear now, really. There's nothing to lose and no embarrassment being beaten by Barcelona at the Camp Nou. It's pretty much something every team in the world at the moment really expects to do when they go to that ground. So if they can maybe nick something there, because the thing is if it's the strange sort of caveat to the European games and away goals is now that Barcelona don't have the ability to get an away goal, one goal for Lyon becomes absolutely enormous. It becomes something where if even they're defending, then they concede one, then it makes a massive difference. So they have to go in this with a lot of faith that maybe they can really do it. And if they do, it will be an absolutely enormous upset. And another minor upset, I think. More the quality of the two teams is probably a little bit closer, really. But I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have picked Real Betis to go over Rennes before the start of their Europa League tie, and that's changed tonight, really. Adam, a 3-1 victory for Rennes. They went up 2-0 as well, which is a real positive, and that Lo Celso goal would have jangled some nerves. I'm sure Rich is probably still shaking from the game itself, and by Niang sealing it at the end as well. We'll sort of come on to Stefan, I suppose, a bit later in our sort of preview for their game at the weekend, really. But sort of stating on this Europa League game, that's 6 goals in their couple of games there. It's a real positive that they're starting to find some attacking edge, even if it is against the side that is a little maybe gung-ho. I'm sure many Spanish experts would say the same, that Betis are as much likely to concede a goal as they will score one. But it's almost unprecedented territory for Rennes for a long while, and it's great to see them finally getting some success in not just in France, where they've been playing reasonably well recently, but also in Europe.
Yeah, indeed. It's a brilliant result. You're absolutely right. It's great to see them, playing well and punching. I wouldn't say above their weight. I think they're a big club. I think Betis are a relatively big club as well. And in wider historical terms, they're probably pretty equal. But you're right. This Real Betis team are exciting, definitely, and very gung ho. Kike Setien with a very sort of high pressing, aggressive kind of style. That is sort of as in a similar way to Lyon, almost, it gets very similar results. So they do well against a slightly bigger size. We mentioned on the previous pod that they beat Barcelona at the Nou Camp earlier this season, but they can be undone by more conservative teams. So perhaps that kind of played into Rennes' hands a little bit. But to win 3-1 at Real Betis in a game that Betis took very seriously, out of the Spanish teams left in the Europa League, obviously Sevilla would take it, it's their competition. But you look at like Villarreal in a relegation fight, and who's the other one? I think of Valencia, who would have preferred to be in Champions League and are focusing on the league. Betis of the Spanish teams really were taking this really seriously, because there's been a while since they've been in European competition, and it was a priority for them. So for Rennes to go there and beat them 3-1 and play brilliantly in the first leg and be 3-1 up in that leg and unlucky not to win that game is a real achievement, not just for the club as a whole, but for Stefan as an individual sort of coach, given how sort of fresh he is as a coach. Looking at Real Betis is a huge achievement, and it's great to see Rennes. When we were discussing before we came on about that, it's good for France in general. The coefficient can take a little bit of a beating when PSG the only team doing relatively well in Europe, I suppose. But getting Rennes into the last 16, get a half decent draw, that they'll fancy themselves to go deep into this competition. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the only worry really now, is that now they've got through this stage, who do they really want in the next round? I mean, the qualifiers this evening are sort of Arsenal, Dinamo Zagreb. That's a team maybe you want to be facing. Frankfurt really playing well in the Bundesliga this season. Napoli probably the favourites for the whole competition itself. Red Bull Salzburg have been a real tough side in Europe in the last couple of years. Valencia, it's always not easy to get a result at the Mestalla, even though they're not quite the power, like you said. Villarreal, not quite doing it in La Liga really, but a 1-1 result has got them through this evening. Zenit is always tough to go to Russia as well, always a great club. Krasnodar, they got a result against Bayer Leverkusen out with an away goal. They're not the easiest side again, because travelling to Russia is such a difficult place, and then having to face someone who has beaten a team in Leverkusen who have been much better recently. Benfica, obviously great European pedigree, a lot of great young players. I caught them tonight because I couldn't find a place to watch Rennes, unfortunately, but João Felix looks like a real player for them. Chelsea are through there, despite their troubles under Sarri. You never really know how much different they might be in 2 weeks' time. Dynamo Kiev, good side as well. Always, again, Ukraine is always a difficult place to go to, and Kiev are always a decent team. Slavia Prague, another side maybe you fancy your chances against, but then Inter Milan, really, really tough game. It's great to see Rennes go through, but given that maybe you would say 90% of those draws you would be unfavourable, can you see Rennes progressing much further than the next round?
Yeah, I think I could. I can see them making the quarterfinals. Like as you said, there were some teams that you would fancy them against there, and I think that a number of the teams that you mentioned are in a similar position to Real Betis in terms of quality, and we didn't expect Rennes necessarily to beat Real Betis. And I think the Europa League as well is a funny competition, because at this stage, motivations are still a little bit up in the air. Some teams, some countries traditionally don't, like Italy, for example, traditionally don't focus on the Europa League and tend to play weakened sides, and some teams are in certain positions where they're at this stage, they've got European aspirations in the league, maybe they're chasing a Champions League spot, or in Villarreal's case, they're fighting against relegation. So when it gets to sort of the quarterfinals, semi-finals, obviously then it starts to heat up, but we're still in that sort of period where there are teams that perhaps there's a bit of a sort of caveat to their participation in the competition at the moment. So I think Rennes could benefit from that to some extent. So I think if they get a decent draw, then I think that a number of those teams are susceptible to the style that they used against Betis, and I think maybe we underestimate Rennes a little bit, because if you look when we're looking through their team, and perhaps those outside France might feel the same about sort of players like Hatem Ben Arfa, Clement Grenier, Ismail Assar, obviously was at the World Cup with Senegal. They're players that are of genuine European quality in their team, and when you compare the first 11 to other first 11s that you just mentioned, although perhaps more illustrious names, maybe this quality of those teams isn't that superior to Rennes. So yeah, I think if I'd back them to, if they don't get one of the real big sides, I'd back them to get to the next round for sure.
Yeah, I think it's fingers crossed, no Napoli, isn't it? I think more than anything, I think that's the one that you definitely want to try and avoid. On to midweek Ligue action, because we did have some games in the midweek, and Paris Saint-Germain got another comfortable win that extends their lead to 15 points at the top. It may be a little bit of a misnomer, really, in this one that it was 5-1, because for a time it was 1-1, and at the same time, a lot of those goals were pretty fortunate, although I maybe see PSG powering at the end, and Angel Di Maria scored an absolute stunner of a free kick, really. If you haven't seen it, there's always YouTube highlights for Liga in English as well, so do catch it, because it's a terrific strike, really. But Paris Saint-Germain going guns to guns isn't really the story I wanted to talk about the PSG, Adam, because there was something else that's cropped up on our news feed earlier today, and it is about one-to-away man Adrien Rabiot. He sacked his agent reportedly today, which, as many pointed out, that's his own mother, because the Barcelona offer is supposedly changing by the minute. They're supposedly saying to him now that essentially their offer's off the table. He will need to sort of come back to them to do that, and that's obviously annoyed him. And we've mentioned a few times that maybe his mother was getting in the way of sort of furthering his career, and that sort of changed at the moment. But it adds to a sort of extra spin to this story that's been going with him and PSG all season long, that Tuchel's wanted him back. Does he want to go back? Is his mother advising him not to try and push for anything to try and return to the first team? Because she stopped him from getting the contract he wanted? Is his own attitude stopped it? It's taking an extra twist and turn as he sort of is heading out the exit door.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre situation, and it must be an interesting conversation to sack your own mum. I don't know how I would go about handling that conversation. So fair play for even having the guts to do that, because his mum's quite an imposing figure as well. So yeah, I think the Rabiot situation is a bizarre one, because you sort of mentioned there with Thomas Tuchel, and I think it's pretty clear that Thomas Tuchel wants him back in the team, and the reason he's been left out of the squad is a sort of decree from upon high, if you like. You know, this is a QSI sort of board level decision rather than Thomas Tuchel's decision, and if it was up to him, he'd be in the team and he'd be playing until the end of the season. Whether that's a good idea, it's very difficult to know. Whether he would be giving 100%, whether he'd be focusing on a move, whether he would be playing for a move, you know, it's very difficult to know what impact he'd have. But given the lack of signings in the window that Thomas Tuchel wanted, okay, they got Paredes, but they wanted two midfielders, and to lose one, and then obviously Lassana Diarra's contract was cancelled yesterday or the day before. He wasn't playing, and he'd been out of the team, and he was injured recently, and you know, and he's a solid enough option for Ligue in that position. So they're pretty thin on the ground there. So I think there's an opportunity for him to have an impact, but it seems that reports suggest that Tuchel has gone to the owners and said he wants him back, and they've denied him that opportunity. So it seems like he's going to be sitting out for the rest of the season, and it's just a very unusual situation. There was sort of news about him being excluded from the squad, and him wanting to train with the team, and him being back, coming back to the training ground, but training away and on his own. It's a very unusual situation. I think, though, for him, it comes down to his sort of the sense of entitlement that saw him sort of lose a little bit of, well, I wouldn't say lose control, but lose his cool over not being selected for the World Cup. And, you know, there was sort of, you know, it was almost like, I play for PSG, I should be in the team. There's a little bit of that with the Barcelona move, because would he get into their side? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, is he better than Ivan Rakitic? Probably not. And there's, you know, the issue with Spurs, like Spurs clearly wanted him, and he sort of turn him down. There's a feeling that he sort of thinks they're a bit beneath him, which I don't know. I think that's a little bit sort of that sense of entitlement coming through again. I think that's his main issue. But whether he manages to find a new agent and then the new agent can sort of get hold of him a little bit, I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting situation with him, and it'd be interesting to see where he's playing his football next season.
Yeah, I think I know some in Barcelona think that Rakitic might be moving on, which feels strange to me because I still think he does a really good job. And you add in that Frankie De Jong's going there as well, obviously in the summer. That they've maybe already spent the money because he's on a big contract as well. They've already got Artur there as well.
He's great. He's a great player as
Yeah,
well.
and you've got to fit Coutinho in. You've still got Sergio Busquets as the sort of defensive midfielder. Is he going to get the game time he really wants? It's the tough one. And then, like you say, he's burnt the bridges of Tottenham. I mentioned it before. I have a worry for him that if something doesn't change dramatically, it feels a little bit like the Max Meyer situation at Schalke last season, that he ended up at Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
So no disparage to them, but it's not quite the level he was thinking about in the sort of January window, at least anyway. So let's hope it doesn't turn that. And that you've mentioned briefly as well, Adam. Credit to Lassana Diarra for a fantastic career as well. He has sort of announced his retirement after the cancellation of that contract as well. So fantastic career for him. I think we all sort of saw at PSG that it was maybe towards the end, and he had a lot of injuries this season as well. And towards the end of last season, he sort of was the stopgap, wasn't he, really, when they needed someone in the Champions League for defensive midfield. But he was excellent at Marseille. He was excellent at, I remember when he sort of first came onto our screens, really more at Portsmouth from memory. He had a couple of little brief appearances, didn't he, for Arsenal and Chelsea, but Portsmouth was where he got his start and was great for Real Madrid as well. So congrats to him, and I enjoy retirement hopefully for him. But I don't think we really need to talk about much of the game, and we'll skip over the other game as well. Bordeaux and Guingamp finished 0-0. It is not much to write home about unless you're Nolan Roos going over the bar from a couple of yards out, and also Jan Karamo joining back in the squad after a shall we say tumultuous couple of weeks where his attitude has been in question, and maybe another young player that's going in the wrong direction. Let's go to Ligue 1 fixtures that are happening this weekend then, because there's some great ones heading into it. And looking first at Friday, where Strasbourg will be hosting Lille, which a couple of weeks ago would have been a really intriguing game given how Strasbourg were in January, but it's gently sort of gone away a little bit in February. Adam, they lost 2-1 to Angers at the start of February, and we mentioned mentioned a couple of times how much they've improved really over the last couple of weeks. They lost to Saint-Etienne the week after that, and then they only could manage a 0-0 draw at lowly Caen, who can't really get almost the first point they've got in the whole of 2019. So it tells you exactly what really that result had been. What's really happened in the last couple of weeks? Has that semi-final, it's ever been since that semi-final they won against Bordeaux to get to the Coupe de la Ligue final? Has their focus sort of shifted a little bit over the last couple of weeks and they've taken their eye off the prize?
Yeah, perhaps. I think the three games that you've mentioned over the last well, in February, aren't they, all three of them? I think, yeah, there's definitely an element of easing back a little bit on the throttle, maybe subconsciously, just because they're favourites to win the Coupe de la Ligue, against Guingamp in the final. They should win that, and that's a huge achievement for them, given their sort of rise from the 5th division when they sort of nearly went out of business and dropped down the leagues and fought their way back. Obviously, they were a trophy winner in the last decade. I think in 2008 they won a cup, perhaps maybe a bit earlier than that. But they're a big team. But to sort of round that comeback off with a trophy win is massive, and that's obviously something that's very difficult to get away from, given the story over the last few years. So I think there's an element of that. But also I think it's also caveated by the fact that those three games are more difficult than perhaps we're giving them credit for. The draw of Caen is frustrating, but Caen are the type of team that can, although they're, I personally think they're going to get relegated, but they can frustrate. And although Strasbourg are third top scorers in the league, I think this year, a 0-0 draw away at Caen at the start of the season would have been seen as a relatively decent result. So it's not too difficult and not too bad, I suppose. And that came 4 days after the trip to Saint-Etienne. Playing 2 away games in 4 days is tough, and narrow defeats to Angers and Saint-Etienne is nothing to be ashamed of. And the Angers game was a little bit anonymous, even though Angers are brilliant, and that's the type of thing that Moulin does brilliantly well. We discussed it previously on the pod, but two goals from Wilfried Kanga. That's something that given that that he missed that open goal that you mentioned, it's brilliant, a brilliant classic Moulin and classic Angers. But it's one of those things that I don't know, there was much they could do. It just feels like that's what Angers just do, and Strasbourg were just their victims this time. And I think as well, injuries have been a bit of an issue. Jonas Martin's been fantastic this season, pretty much ever present in the league. but has missed the last 6 games with injury, and he was starting to run that midfield. He was consistently great throughout the season, and without him, Shanjan Perkic has come in, and he was at Rennes, and he knows the league, but he's not the same quality, and there's sort of a little bit of a drop off there. And even Kenny Lala missed that game at Saint-Germain, who's been really important for them this season. And one or two, Dimitri Linar's been injured. A number of players have sort of had little games out, and the 2 games in the week they rested a couple of players. Oljorke and Matiba didn't play out front together for either of those Saint-Etienne or Caen games. So I think there's a few little things, and I still think they're playing relatively well. It's just a combination of factors conspired to see them sort of lose some intensity, and they've sort of just slipped just below the threshold that they'd sort of been performing above, if you like, for the rest of the year. So I wouldn't be worried if I were them. When you look at the table, they're ninth with 36 points, and then you've got Nice on 37, Rennes and Montpellier on 38, and Marseille and Saint-Etienne in 4th and 5th on 40. So they're only 4 points off 4th. So I think they're still in it, and it's just a frustrating sort of mini blip for them. And I think they'll be fine, and they'll especially once they get that final out of the way, which is still a little way to go. That they'll stay in the Europa League race right until the end, I think.
Yeah, I think because there's sort of an accumulation of teams, isn't it? Like you just mentioned. I mean, there's still Nîmes and Rennes below them that are on the exact same points as well. So you can go from, with the results going their way, they could be 6th at the end of the weekend, or they could be sort of 11th or closer to 12th at the end of the weekend. It could be very strange. And like you say, just a couple of players cooling off really as well. Lebo Matiba's not really scored in for the last couple of games, hasn't been quite as electric. They're still creating chances as well. You see in the highlights that they're still making things happen. They're just not really finishing things off. And combine that with maybe a couple of difficult games, and they've got a couple of runs. But the unfortunate thing for them is they run into a difficult game as well. But at the same time, Lille, over the sort of February time in Ligue 1, at least they've won 2 games against Nice and Guingamp, which isn't really too impressive. They were pretty unfortunate really against Montpellier. They had a fair few chances, but it's another one of those games where they just couldn't quite find the killer blow to get them another win. And they're still in a comfortable position in the league. They're still sitting another 4 points above Lyon and plenty of points above Marseille. But at the same time, with those kind of teams behind you, and especially the things that have happened to Lille in the recent past, they'll want to keep the foot on the gas, and they've got terrific strikers. There's no worry of them really going on a run to put this excellent first 2/3 of the season, you should say, to a wrong end, would it?
No, I don't think so. I think, especially with Lyon's continued involvement in the Champions League, all right, there's might only be 1 game, but I think that'll continue to divert the focus a little bit for them. And I just think that Christophe Galtier is too astute of a coach to let his team slip in terms of intensity. We saw at Saint-Etienne that he managed. That was kind of his thing. Like he managed to be consistent and get the best out of minimal resources. Well, he's got quite a lot of resources now, and he's still maintaining this consistency. Now he's got his feet under the table. He's got some players in that he wanted over the summer after keeping them up last year. He's doing the same thing he did at Saint-Etienne, but perhaps in a less competitive, well, not less competitive, but maybe they're one of the better sides, but than Saint-Etienne were when they were trying to get into the Champions League. But he's doing a very similar job in terms of consistency and in terms of results. So I would imagine that he is wily enough to keep his team focused and keep them sort of ploughing ahead. They're probably not going to. I know obviously out of the Coupe de Ligue. I don't know if they're still in the Coupe de France. I don't think they are. They might be. I can't remember off the top of my head who's in the quarterfinals, but the league is their focus for the rest of the year, and there are a number of teams in the league that have other focuses, like we mentioned, Strasbourg, Lyon, Rennes, PSG, and Lyon are not one of them. Finishing second would be a huge thing for them, and I think that prize will keep them focused and definitely keep Christophe Galtier focused. And with Nicolas Pepe in any sort of form, that you'd fancy him to win most games in this league, and especially with the emergence of Rafa Leao, who's been absolutely fantastic in the last couple of months. That they're still a developing side, if you like. Jonathan Ikone and Jonathan Bamba, forming that sort of trident with Pepe as well. They're a team that are still on the up. They're still on this upward curve, although they've had a little bit of They had a frustrating game at Montpellier, who are a team designed to frustrate. I wouldn't be too worried about that. They smashed Nice really 4-0. That was excellent. And 2-0 win at Guingamp as well is all right at the bottom of the league, but a 2-0 away win in Ligue is nothing to be sniffed at. So I think they're still on that upward curve, and I would back Christophe Galtier to maintain their consistency as he's proven that he can until the end of the year. I think they're favourites to finish second. The 4-point gap, more consistent than Lyon, perhaps with Pepe in this form. They've got the best player outside Paris in the league at the moment, and I'd back him to sort of be able to unlock any of the defenses below them. So yeah, I'd say that they're still on that upward curve. It'd be interesting to see what happens next season if changes are made and Pepe leaves and they don't necessarily replace him. That'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I think for this year they should be keep that intensity going for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think it's not just a worry there, is it? I worry that if Leao goes as well, if he carries on this kind of form and someone sneaks in a big enough offer to tempt Lille to sell both of them, because obviously financial issues may come into play, because the NCG may force their hand more than anything and wonder why they're not selling players for good prices when they obviously still need the cash as well, as we saw with Ballatore going as well. But yeah, they can be great to watch. I don't know. I hope for one thing that Galtier doesn't listen to Jose Mourinho like he might have done at the weekend, who was in attendance. But hopefully he ignores his advice, at least anyway, of maybe turning it down a notch, if anything, really. But yeah, it's funny. You mentioned, like they say, the Nice game was really impressive that they won 4-0, and then you go the week after that, Nice obviously went to win at Lyon, and you think, oh, that really confirms how excellent Lille were and how much they absolutely tore them apart and proved that Nice is such a difficult team to break down. And then they lose 3-0 at Angers the week after, and you think, well, is that a misnomer, or is that just that? Is Nice sort of flip flopping? It sort of leads you to question bits, but yeah, it just feels like at the moment, at least for Lille, they've not got a particularly difficult set of games after this one. If they can get a result here, they've got Dijon at home, which is a surefire banker really, and Saint-Etienne away isn't. It shouldn't be out of their wheelhouse, at least anyway. Monaco at home, depending on what Monaco turns up, they've still got PSG and Lyon away sort of towards May time, at least anyway. But they have to be favourites, don't they? And they have to be favourites in this game as well, I think, Adam. But what do you think the score will be?
I think there'll be goals. 3-2 Lille.
Yeah, I'm feeling a 2-1 Lille. I think, like you say, I'm a little bit worried that Strasbourg might just take their eyes off the ball for European competition, at least anyway. With so many teams around there, a couple of results going wrong and everyone else winning would take them out of the race. But let's hope not. On to things towards the bottom of the table now, and two sides that I think saying any kind of form on them at the moment is maybe a little bit unfair, because Toulouse are hosting Caen, and like we mentioned, the away side, they dropped into the bottom two at the weekend after their 0-0 draw. It wasn't quite enough to stave off other teams rising above them, and they've had a pretty dreadful season so far, and it's been pretty bad ever since the turn of the year as well. They've only got 1 point out of a possible I think it's 15 available altogether. Yeah, it's not a great run for them. They lost against Nantes, who were in terrible form as well for obvious circumstances. They lost to Amiens, who are a team that realistically they should be looking to pick up points against. And this is another one, looking at their games they have next, because after this one, they've got Lyon in the Cup. They've got Paris Saint-Germain, Rennes, Saint-Etienne, Monaco. Nîmes, if you go even further, Nîmes, Angers, who are both in good form at the moment. It looks like they need something from this game if they want to stand any chance of staying up this season, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's getting in that direction. And when you mention that run of fixtures, and we're 25 games in, that means they've had easier games that they haven't picked up points from, which is is worrying from their point of view. And I think I just think that they in the classic sort of league and set teams, league and sense, I guess, like the classic dynamic that you have in the bottom half of the table, and that they're solid enough, but they just don't score goals. And their sort of raft of not necessarily wayward, but typically not very clinical strikers, and they sort of collect them, and they just seem to be struggling to score the goals that would win those games. The draw we mentioned with Strasbourg is a classic example. being 0-0, perhaps that's a game they might have snuck a 1-0 win in previous years, but Enzo Cavarelli's never really scored goals inconsistently at Ligue, and he's sort of been around a bit with Bordeaux and Angers, and Yassine Bamou isn't perhaps the most clinical of strikers either, more of a winger, even a number 10 sometimes I've heard people refer to him. I don't think he's going to be scoring you double figures a season. Casimir Ninga's the same. He was an odd, addition from Montpellier, never really scored goals and is more of a winger. Claudio Bovu's got past 30 now and really fell out of favour at Celta Vigo, although he did all right in Ligue previously. And they just haven't got the type of player they can rely on to even get them sort of 8 goals and 10 goals a season, and that might end up being a downfall. And they've missed opportunities to win games like that Strasbourg game far too often, and now they've got this run of fixtures. I'm sort of thinking that the bottom 2 is almost kind of done. I mentioned on the previous pod, I think everyone above Toulouse and 27 points will be fine. I think Monaco will be fine. And then Amiens with Konaté, if they can keep Konaté and Godos fit and playing well together, then they'll be okay as well. Which just leaves Dijon, Caen and Guingamp. And I think Dijon are just better than the other 2. And Kambare is an astute coach who's done well at clubs in similar positions. And I just don't know. I don't see Caen or Guingamp finishing higher than 18th. And then Dijon would be the only club I'd be thinking could get sucked in, and I don't think they will. So I kind of feel like the bottom 2 are sort of slipping away already, and you're out with that run of fixtures. It sort of adds to that feeling, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we mentioned a few weeks ago that Caen's game against Nantes felt like one of those ones where it's a home game. It's a chance for them to maybe nick one of those wins like they do that keeps them the head above water, and to lose that more than anything. Might be really the final nail in the coffin, really, because again, for like you mentioned, for Guingamp as well, I felt like that chance for Lyon Rennes in midweek was just if that goes in, you'd think, well, maybe Guingamp have a chance. With it, they're missing that, and the run of games they've got future. They got Angers at the weekend who are in terrific form. It's not ideal for them either, but at the same time, while Caen have been pretty awful, really, and a hodgepodge of Ligue 1 talent, they've got Toulouse at the weekend, which gives them their only slight ray of hope, because they've not been very good either, really, in the last couple of months or so. Looking back sort of through January, yes, they got a win away from Nîmes, which was good, and they've been on a good run of form. But especially February, they were pretty unlucky against Monaco, you could say, in that 2-1 defeat. But to that end, they were maybe a little bit lucky against Reims a couple of weeks ago to get a 1-1 draw. They played a Bordeaux side that are really uninspired at the moment, and still managed to lose 2-1. But has this come at a favourable time for them to get a game? They've got Guingamp in a couple of weeks as well. Like you say, you feel like on 27 points they feel pretty much safe, but a win here practically guarantees it, surely, doesn't it?
Yeah, you'd imagine so. 30 points, maybe a 10-point gap to the bottom 3, maybe a 12-point gap to the bottom 2. Yeah, if they win this game, that is. And yeah, I think so. I think they just have the quality that those teams below them don't have, Monaco aside. And there's a couple of things that are sort of holding them back. I think Casanova's management is a little bit unpredictable, and I think he's a little bit too conservative in his team selection a lot of the time, especially in midfield. But they just have the quality that, like, for Max Gradel, Caen would love a player of Max Gradel's quality. He would probably be the difference between them finishing in the bottom 2 or not. And Gradel really has carried Toulouse at times this season. But they have, if you look behind him, players like Mathieu Deserve got double figures of assists for Metz last season. Okay, he's not been brilliant this season, but he started to pick up form in the last couple of months. Ibrahim Sankara has been really, really good this year, aside from that injury. And even in midfield behind him, Jimmy Durmaz is a Swedish international. Manu Garcia is a very talented young player, was very good in Holland last year, part of the Manchester City academy. I think John Bostock's been good when he's been given a chance, but Casanova doesn't fancy him, I heard, because he doesn't put too much effort in training, which seems a little bit counterproductive, given that for the most part, when he plays, Toulouse play much better. But they just have the quality that those teams don't, and I think that this is the type of game that, because of that quality, because they've got goals in their team, because they've got more control in midfield, because they've got when Christophe Julien isn't playing terribly and he's been much better in the last couple of months, they've got a relatively stoic defence. this is the type of game that they would win and Con would lose, because Con don't have those things about their team, and it's just it's fine margins, as is the case at this level. But it's a classic matchup between a team just good enough to stay up and Con, who are just not good enough to stay up. And it was, I have a feeling it'll fall in Toulouse's direction for those reasons.
Yeah, and there's a couple of teams in this bottom half of the table that I'm saying above sort of those five that were sort of in the relegation scrap. I'd say that three block of Toulouse, Nantes, and Bordeaux, and I'm going to give Nantes a bit of a break because they lost a big goal scorer regardless of the tragedy that happened, and obviously the surplus of that is that it's really affected the team as well, and can't really blame that. I'm gonna give them a pass, but Toulouse and Bordeaux this season have been atrocious, I think, at times. They really have. I mean, they both need to have a look inwards and have a look at the managers that they have in charge. I mean, because they both have real talents on their team. And like you mentioned, Grudel and Jimmy Durmaz are really good players on their day. I'm not really convinced by Yaya Sanogo, but they've allowed Todibo to go as well. Obviously, he looked like a real talent, and they've just sort of allowed him to waltz out the door. And Bordeaux, they've got Caramo, they've got Francois Camino, and they've even got Josh Madger now as well as an extra striker. They had some really interesting midfielders, but they never used them. Both of them have been really, really bad to watch at times this season. I mean, I don't really want to advise anyone watching either the Nantes Bordeaux game or the Toulouse Caen game at the weekend, because I don't think any of them will keep you awake on Sunday afternoon after maybe a little bit of a Sunday lunch. So maybe try and avoid those two, but they both really need to have a big look at the summer and think where they want to be direction wise, because neither of the people in charge of those clubs are really creating either entertaining or exciting football. And really next season, if teams come up that are the similar, if we lose Caen and Gamgomp, for example, and we gain teams that have the ambition of Nîmes or the great strategic nonsense, even goals now that we have at Reims, then those two are going to be in real trouble, regardless of what talent they have in the extra final of the field. But unfortunately, we do need a prediction on this game, really, Adam. And I know it's maybe not the most exciting one, but what do you think the score will be in this one?
I think 2-0 to lose.
I'm going slightly less favourably, so we're saying 1-0 to lose it. I'm going to say they even score it in the 89th minute with maybe just a sort of. I'm going to go now 89th minute Max Langradel penalty. That's pretty much the only way Toulouse have scored this season. So let's keep that moment going. On to more exciting games, really. So there's two crackers to finish the weekend, and we start with our Europa League favourites Rennes taking on Marseille, and the away side have been much better in the last couple of weeks. We've sort of beomed their first half of 2019 from sort of November, well, even from November, really, late November onwards, they were pretty dreadful. But they've got 3 wins under their belts now. Admittedly, Bordeaux, Dijon, and Amiens aren't going to exactly strike the fear into the hearts of anyone. But the most important thing is they're getting back on form, they're scoring goals, and most importantly, Mario Balotelli is getting them.
Yes, he is, and I think it's kind of been a difference since he's come in. It's not only has he been scoring goals. I actually watched their game from the weekend against Amiens this morning, and his goal was fantastic. The way he sort of hits on the turn, the ball comes into him, he controls it, and almost before he's turned, he sort of hits it on the turn and very, very quickly, and he catches Regis getting them out. And I think that the way he interacts with Tuvan, and the way he got. I know he's famous for sort of getting frustrated and throwing his arms up in the air and, looking like he's not, like he's sort of frustrated with teammates and exasperated. But I think the way that he was interacting with the team, it looked like he was, engaged and, invested in what Marseille are trying to do. And I think he's given the whole team a bit of a lease of life, a bit of a boost coming in. They've sort of figured out how to get the best out of him for now. He's scoring goals and playing well, and he looks like he's building a decent relationship with the fans and his teammates, and the team as a whole seems to have clicked a little bit, because with Marseille there was sort of a big, however critical we were of them, and we were pretty critical of them on the pod over the course of the year, and deservedly so. They've been pretty poor at times, and their philosophy seems to be give it to Payet and Tuvan and hope they can win us the game, and that's still sort of the case. but it just seems it's a coalesce with Balotelli because there's a big hole up front. As I sort of started to mention with Mitroglou and Germain and G, and none of those players really fit as a lone striker. Playing him as a two didn't really work, and it opened up in midfield. But with Balotelli, they have a ready-made the sort of quintessential second striker who does all the running for Balotelli that Alassane Plea did for a long time at Nice in Germain, and he plays that role really well. And since Balotelli's come into the team, Germain has actually been really pretty good. Not necessarily threatening on goal, but he's got through a lot of work. He's been industrious and in pressing and played a really, really good support role. And it means that Florian Thauvein's been given a little bit more space and there's been a little bit more interplay between the three of them. And if they can get Payet back and playing, and Gustavo's been injured for a couple of times, then maybe the ideas that Garcia had when they were playing well at the start of 2018, sort of January, February, when Thauvin was really on form, can sort of start to coalesce again. And they're fortunate in that the rest of the league hasn't got away from them. Somehow they're still fourth. I'm amazed that they're still fourth and only 6 points behind Lyon, given how poor they've been. But the team is starting to sort of come together again, and Balotelli seems to be the catalyst for that. And there are while we're sort of talking about it, I just wanted to mention Boubacar Kamara, who's started the last 7 games and it's been a little bit up and down, but he's been really, really good, and he's sort of got dropped Rolando out of the team, and Duje Kletashara, who'd been, I thought, pretty terrible when he played up until that point. And he's formed a good partnership with Kamara in the last 3 games, and Jordan Amavi looks more confident, and when he'd been really pretty bad this season, and he's got back into the team and is playing well. And it just seems like they're sort of starting to come together again. Maxime Lopez is another really good example. He started the last 8 games when he was sort of in and out of the team and his form wasn't great, but he's been fantastic in the last few weeks. He passes so intelligently in midfield, and I just think it's sort of starting to come together for them. And it looks like Balotelli's sort of been a bit of a lease of life for the club, and hopefully that can continue.
Yeah, hopefully that it's sort of all congealing together, isn't it? The fact that they're playing more consistently, they're getting better results, the players are playing for each other. The thing will be for them is this is probably going to be a big test. Looking at the games after this, Saint-Etienne, Nice, Paris Saint-Germain as well, this is the sort of section of the season which is going to be important to them, and whether they can really chase down a Champions League place or not, really, because I mean, especially that Bordeaux game, they were handed that one almost. In the Dijon one, they maybe got out of jail a little bit, but they were much better against Amiens. And like you say, the relationship Balotelli seems to be doing. If you've not seen it already, and those at home, Thauvin scores the first goal for Marseille. It seems to have pulled a muscle, at least anyway, initially sort of hobbling on that thigh after he scores the goal, but does carry on playing. He seems okay after a couple of little bits of running around, and then as Balotelli scores his goal, his celebration is to emulate his friends. Similar pull of a muscle, really, in there. Have a nice little bit of a joke about that. So it's good to see the relationship starting to build there. And like you say, I much prefer Balotelli in that style of being more instinctive and a more lethal striker at that. And the only problem really for the good feeling that Marseille have is they're facing a Rennes side that we said after a bit of a blip in January, they maybe needed to see how they got on. And admittedly, last time in Ligue, they lost 2-0 to Reims, but at the moment, that's nothing to shake a stick at. They're a really difficult team to come against. But other than that, wins against Saint-Etienne, against Amiens, against Lille in the Cup. They've obviously qualified through the Europa League, which is going to be a huge boost to them morale-wise, and a proof that the hope we had for Julien Stéphan, which was going to be that how would his team react to adversity, and that's not just through the league but also through the Europa League now as well. And this is maybe the sort of accumulation of that completely, because victory here, and it's difficult to say that Stéphan is really the man that Rennes want for the rest of their future, and someone they can allow to shape their club for years to come.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it's going in that direction. I'm honestly surprised that he hasn't been, given that responsibility already. And I think they've kind of stumbled across something at Rennes perhaps they weren't expecting with how well he's done, and the astute management he's sort of portraying as head coach. And I feel like there isn't a better option out there than him. So I would hope that they invest in his future, and he could be an exciting young French coach for years to come. He, as he's already proven he's capable of being. So I think, for them, then that they should invest in him, and it'd be really interesting to see where they end up finishing in the league overall. And even if they beat Marseille, here, they're a point behind them. They'll be on 39 points and Marseille on 40. But I think that they may, Rennes may sort of, struggle with their continued involvement in the Europa League. That's traditionally been something that, especially for younger sides, and are not as young as they were, with Ben Arfa coming in and Guerrero there now, a bit more experienced. But traditionally, sides like Bordeaux and Saint-Etienne in particular have struggled with that sort of duality of playing both competitions. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage to handle them both. But that's another sort of feather in Julien Stéphan's cap, that they've managed to handle it relatively well so far under his sort of tutelage. So I think they should focus on investing in Stéphan's future, because I think they might have stumbled across someone that could be a real sort of turning point for them, and that they perhaps didn't expect, and they should go for it. And I think he's a really interesting coach, and sort of really has potential to be the best coach for this generation of young French coaches, and of which there aren't loads, to be honest. I think he's the man for them, and they should realize that.
Absolutely. And thinking about the things he's done so far, bringing Bourigeaud back into the fold has obviously been a real success. Someone surprisingly sort of ostracized a couple of times under former management. He's getting performances out of him by Niang, which I never thought would be potentially possible with what we've seen previously of him in Ligue. Having Hannah Tembanarfa there as an X factor, it just maybe needs in the summer a consistent striker, unless he can turn Jordan Sipacho into a regular Liga goal scorer. If he can find someone like that in the summer instead, a really complete sort of team. They've got a decent defence, the players that are playing for them now. You're looking at players like Stéphan, who obviously scored a goal the other week as well for the first time in the longest time. He's got Ben Sebaini playing a little bit more for him as well. Just feels like they won two more players, and they're not far off him being a really competitive team in Ligue and even for Champions League places next season. But I'm really excited about this game. I think this could be a really entertaining one. But Adam, what do you think the score will be?
Rennes at home, aren't they? Two each, I think. I'm going for exciting as well. Yeah,
literally read my mind. I think I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw as well. It just feels like both sides are capable of scoring, and it's going to be a really exciting game if you can catch it. On to the final one of the weekend, and what would usually be a barnstormer, but you may have said it wasn't down a couple of weeks ago, but now a couple of weeks further on in the future, and all of a sudden it's an interesting competitive game again, because Monaco have sort of accosted. They got 7 points out of their last 9 now. They've lifted themselves out of the drop zone, and a win here would really start putting some distance between them and that relegation fight that they've been stuck in. And we've mentioned how good they've been on Monday's podcast, and against the Lyon side that do sometimes play down to competition, but at the same time, would you play down to a Monaco side? It adds a little bit of an extra to it. But Monaco at the moment under Jardim, with everyone starting to get fit now as well, Adam, and with the likes of Martins obviously contributing quite a bit in his first couple of games as well, and Golovin finding his feet as well. Now he's fully fit, and under Jardim instead of Henry, they're just starting to look more like the side we expected to, even though they are still getting a couple of rubbers of the green, and they're not quite there yet. They're getting closer.
Yeah, absolutely. They are getting there. I think the return of Jardim is key. He should never have been sort of, I don't know if he was sacked, but sort of, parted company with. He's proven a master at gelling a disparate group of players together and producing, excellent results eventually. I just think they acted a little bit hastily, and he would have sort of found his way eventually. And I think with Monaco, I don't know if I mentioned previously, but on the pod, but they've used 49 players in all competitions this season, which is really quite something. Obviously, that's sort of caveated by injuries and 2 managers and transfers in and out, which have been pretty extensive. But it shows that they've been kind of all over the place this year. But it's starting to coalesce again under Jardim. And I think the thing that's interesting for me with Monaco at the moment is sort of above Jardim and the removal of or the departure of Vadim Vasiliev, who was their vice president, and Dmitry Oboliev, the owner, who bought a large stake in the club when they were in Ligue 2, and he brought in Vasiliev pretty soon after, and when they were still in Ligue 2, and together they got them promoted, and obviously went on to win the league in less than 5 years, which is extremely impressive. And it seemed a little bit rash to act so swiftly and so sort of broadly in getting rid of Vasiliev, given that he'd sort of Henri had gone and Michael Emenalo's future is I'm not actually sure if he's gone yet too, but he was pretty.
Yeah, I think he went about a month ago now.
Yeah.
He went pretty quickly after Henri did. I think that was the agreement that Jardim came in and went, and I don't really want him staying either. So I think he went pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly, because it was the Jardim sort of Ryboliev sort of took all he called Jardim personally and apologized for sacking him, and which is a ridiculous situation to be in. I imagine Jardim was enjoying that, and basically took all of his advice for this January transfer window, because I wasn't sure about Emenalo. It doesn't really matter, but I wasn't sure if Emenalo was sort of suspended in the same way that other managers are, and then not actually sacked. But he's definitely not involved anymore. And Vasiliev was sort of the head, I guess, of those two other sort of sections of the club, and I guess the Ryboliev sort of felt that the buck stopped with him a bit, and he went too. But I kind of felt that he's the man that has sort of facilitated their rise back from Ligue 2 to winning the title, and the way he's gone about signing players, and the way that they built the squad and built the model, and the way they made so much money from transfers, and a lot of that was reinvested in younger players, and the way those have been developed. And although it may have been a mistake to lose Jardim, I think it may also be a mistake for Vasiliev to go. So it'd be really interesting to see how that happens, and how it plays out without him. And they've got a new vice president to replace him, who I think his name's Oleg Petrov. He doesn't have much of a football background, but has a sort of extensive business background in the same way that Vasiliev and Ryboliev do. But given that Vasiliev did such a good job, it's going to be really, really difficult for him to emulate that success. So I'm just wondering whether that when it comes to the summer, is their recruitment going to be an issue again, as it was this summer with Emenalo, and will it coalesce again in the same way it did under Vasiliev? And I don't know that it will. So having Jardim back is a start. As I said, they've listened to him, and Emenalo's gone, and Yuri Tielemans, who he didn't fancy, for example, was loaned out to Leicester, and another part of players that is sort of his decisions, his choices, like Gelson, like Adrian Silva, like Vinicius was sort of brought in, and he was sort of given the keys, if you like. And that's a good idea, but whether they went too far in getting rid of Vasiliev would be interesting to see how it plays out, because I wonder if that's a bad decision.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it on Monday. I don't want to sort of repeat what I already said then, but at the same time, it felt like they maybe lent it too much into the youth products without realizing how much they'd sold on. Really, I don't think they really contemplated that. Yes, they'd brought in a load of young players that had got them success, but they were at the club for 2-3 years before they sold them on, and then they sold them all in one go and tried to replace them all in one transfer window. It doesn't really work like that. If they do it sort of incrementally now, if they sort of go, okay, we need to sign two. Say we've got 5 players we need to sign. Let's have 3 young players that we can integrate slowly, and 2 senior pros that are going to work a little bit better with the squad. That's maybe an easier way to do it. And that's probably what Jardim has sort of expressed to them, because the problem is now is some of the young players that they have are going to be difficult to sell unless Tielemans has a really good Premier League season, half season, which is probably their real hope. They'll probably want to move him on. And you look at other players they may have thought of. Jemison's not really going to be a mover anymore, really, in all honesty. I don't think he really deserves to get into the Monaco team, never mind anyone else's team, really, at the moment. Sidibé's probably gone past the point of somewhere where you would sell him, but he's still useful for the club at least. Obviously, Glick was never really bought as someone to sell. Ronnie Lopez having a big injury this season's maybe curtailed anyone coming in for him at the summer, so they may be having to adjust plans because of the fact that they have been so poor, and the fact that they're not really going to have the chance to sell any young players this summer, unless it was for a lot less than they would have been hoping for, at least anyway. And that's not really the way you keep that sustainable model going. On to their opponents very quickly, Adam, really, because we've got too much time. But Lyon, is there any chance that they'll be suffering from any sort of Champions League hangover, or one of those classic Lyon plays down to a team that's below them kind of moment?
Perhaps. I think it's an interesting time to play Monaco, because as I said, this, as we've been discussing, they're kind of on the up, and they're playing well, and they've got some exciting players in their team. And for the team that sort of seems to be developing with, look at their first 11, and you say Monaco's first 11 is sort of Falcao, Gelson, Lopez, Fabregas, Golovin, Adrian Silva as a front 6. That's not a bottom 5 league and team at all. That's a top 3 Ligue 1 team, and with Jardine back in charge, they're not the team that perhaps other Ligue 1 clubs have enjoyed playing this season when under Thierry Henry, when they're obviously really poor. So I think it'd be a mistake for them to sort of, as you mentioned, sort of play down to them, and I don't think they will. I think that Genesio is probably a little bit more wise to that, but obviously 5 days between games isn't too bad. It's not, it's what they play on Tuesday and the game's on Sunday night, so it's a little bit of a gap. So I imagine with Fekir having not played in the week, he'll play, and they'll put out a pretty strong side, maybe rotate a little bit, but I would imagine that it'll be a strong Lyon team, and they'll take this game very seriously, because Monaco are a dangerous position again.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with Lyon at the moment, really, is they've not quite got the amount of depth, have they? They can't quite really rotate everyone out, really. You'd maybe think that not just Fekir, you'd maybe Cornet starts at the weekend as well, as to add a bit of freshness to the front line that looked a little bit leggy at the weekend. But then the problem is you maybe want to replace one of those midfielders, but do you take one of those out at the moment? It's a difficult decision, or any of the defenders really either. After such a superb performance, it makes it more difficult. But final predictions then, Adam. What do you think the score will be in this one?
I think Monaco might get something from this. I'm going to say 2-2 again.
I fancy a Monaco win. I think this might be. They're on a little bit of a roll now. They're starting to get results. I think this is maybe the game where we see the performance out of them a little bit more. Jardim, motivate them, go and show them what you're really about, and make sure that they, in the next couple of weeks after this game, really, they've got. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the easiest round of games, really, but classic Monaco winnable games. You're thinking Angers and Bordeaux before they face Lille, and then Caen to end out March, and Guingamp as well. You feel like a win here, maybe you can get 4 wins out of 5 there, but skipping the sort of Lille game, saying that they find it tricky there, but they could always win the draw there, and then they're not just going to be out of the drop zone, but potentially sneakily heading into a European fight before the end of the season. But we might be thinking a little bit too far ahead. But I'm going to go 2-1 Monaco, and it should be a good one. Though I think both of those 2 games at the end of the weekend will be certainly ones to watch. That's all for this week. My thanks to Adam and all of you listening at home. Do join us again for the main show, which will be back on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.